the path that's concreted over and easy to walk on never leads to a treasure. It's always somewhere hidden, right? Otherwise, everyone would find it.
Welcome to the podcast where we try to inspire better work performance. Thanks for listening.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today on Management Muse. This episode is sponsored by The Uncertainty Playbook, written by myself and Jeffrey Tumlin, and available on all of our websites and Amazon.com. This episode is a revisit to an oldie but a goodie. It is with our nephew, Spencer Fraseur, and it is about one of the most useful personality traits that we've ever discovered when it comes to thinking about people at work. And so hope you enjoy this episode and enjoy your turkey or whatever it is you eat for Thanksgiving. Probably, if not turkey, probably Chinese food. So anyway, hope you enjoy. Hey everybody, thanks for joining us on Management Muse. I'm Cindi Baldi. I'm with Jeffrey Tumlin,
Hello.
my husband and partner. And this is a family episode. We have Spencer Fraseur back, my illustrious nephew, who is just about to sit for his dissertation proposal.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
And we're gonna talk about embracing failure. So Spencer, tell us a little bit about like your philosophy of embracing failure like an engineer.
So to me, I think failure is something that people often think of as the end of the road, right? The end of something that they want to do. A stopping point. But really, people's view of failure is very unhealthy. I think just society as a whole. When I started writing my book, Failing Upward, it was pretty clear that it was something that needed to be talked about because people that I interviewed for the book, they all had very similar feelings about failure, that it was the end of the road, that it was something that once you hit, it caused depression and sadness.
Almost more like a sign that you shouldn't be proceeding.
Exactly. And so the whole goal of the book was to reorganize how we view failure, to recontextualize it. It's not necessarily the end of the road, but more a stepping stone. So when we think about how an engineer views failure, failure is, I think Mark Rober said it best, a bug.
Who's Mark Rober?
Mark Rober is an engineer who is famous on YouTube.
Okay.
But one of the things he says that I think really resonates is that failure is not a bug, it's a feature. So failure gets you to where you want to go. It's something that is iterative. You learn from it, you make adjustments, and you move forward. And sometimes failing can show you the limitations or maybe even point you towards a better direction.
Okay, I have a question. So and this is for all of us, I think. What's the best failure you ever had?
What is the best failure?
Yeah, like it could have felt terrible when it happened, but like when you look back, you're like, wow, that was like actually really important to me.
I mean, I think about failure, and anytime, I've always heard the saying, anytime you do something worth doing, there's going to be failure, right? There's going to be something that is in your way. And something I say in my book is that the path that's, concreted over and easy to walk on never leads to a treasure. It's always somewhere hidden, right? Otherwise, everyone would find it.
Right. But that's why the path is trodden. Right?
Yeah. So, it's just, I think about failure in my own life, and my wife can attest to this, but there's been numerous times, and I can't really give one example, but jobs that I've applied for, jobs that she's applied for, opportunities that we've both tried to be a part of that just haven't worked out. And at the time, it felt world shattering, like it was just everything was going wrong and it was never going to be better. And then, you go down the path a little bit further, you say, okay, this isn't going to work out. I'm going to keep moving forward. Or maybe I'm going to change something. But overall, the outcome is if you just have the faith and determination, you usually end up with something better, is what I find.
You made me think of sort of how I feel about, and don't worry, you're safe. Divorce. So, like a lot
Turns out to be quite a podcast we're having here.
But like a lot of people, when they're getting divorced, they feel like a failure. But I mean, obviously, depending on how long you were married, but presumably you had good times together, and that was success. And so just because it's coming to an end doesn't necessarily mean that everything was a failure. It just means that everything changed and your time is out. And most of the people in our lives, when they've gotten divorced, they've actually bounced back. And I mean, it's not that I disliked their former partners, but I think that they found a better match for them today with their next partner after a divorce.
Yeah, I can see that.
And so, to the extent, I don't really like to think of divorce as failure, but I know a lot of people do. I think that should be reframed as just sort of it's a time thing. Like our time, we changed as individuals and our time is out. And then, the next thing is that, look, you learned a lot from being married to that person. You learned a lot about yourself and what you do and don't want, as well as having grown as an individual. And now you make the next choice and it's actually potentially a better fit.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that you're off the hook.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. So what we're saying, I think, is that you got to get beyond the
static of it just being succeed or fail.
Yeah. Yeah. It's more complicated.
It's more of a process, I think.
So that's something I talk about in the book, is just this idea that success and failure are not directly in opposition of each other. Failure is very similar to success. And a lot of times we go through many, many, many failures. Sometimes a lot, sometimes a little, but we go through failures to get to success. You can have failure within overarching success, but you can't necessarily have success without some failure.
Well, and I think also both of them can lead to a point where you just don't really know what's next. So if you have a success and it's the end of a journey, I think you can be just as lost as having a failure where you don't know how to pick up and move on. Both of them require, they're both a loss of a goal. One is a loss because you achieved it. And so it's the goal is gone. You need a new goal. And the other is a loss of the goal because you weren't able to make it work, or at least you perceive that you weren't able to make it work.
Yeah.
And so when then should this resistance or failure actually signal that we should quit?
I'm going to let you guys talk about this because I have probably a different opinion than you guys.
I mean, I think it's tricky, right? I think one of the things that we want to emphasize from this conversation is that people don't test themselves enough. And in order to test yourself, there's going to be discomfort. But that's where a lot of growth and risk-taking and, it's every now and then I'll get on IMDb or Wikipedia and read about somebody in entertainment, and you realize basically no matter who it is, how many crappy movies or crappy DVDs or crappy songs they put out. And there's gems in between that. And so a lot of the people who achieve the most have a long track record of having a lot of failures, which I think goes hand in hand.
They just have a long track record. And so,
yeah, it's true.
They're constantly, I mean, I think actors, and I say this also about Mormons with the 2-year running around, knocking on doors.
Right.
You have to be really good at failure. You have to be really good at rejection, which is, another way to think, well, this interaction failed. And I find that the Mormons are actually, in my observations, tend to be very good business people because they bounce right back.
They have a healthy relationship with failing.
I look for the trend line. So I'm looking more like the stock market. I'm trying not to pay attention to the noise, the small ups and downs. And instead, you're looking for the trend line, which is there progress? And then is there enough progress where I'm happy with continuing on this journey? And so a small obstacle with trying to get, a small failure with trying to get where you're trying to go, I'm not going to focus on that. I'm going to pull back the lens and I'm going to try to look at the overall and be like, okay, in general, I'm getting better at doing this, or in general, people seem to like what I'm doing, and then figure out how to continue on. And if I don't have that answer, if I get the answer that no, we've had things that didn't work out for us, even in the business in terms of like products. If you don't get any traction, or you don't get enough traction where there's not enough growth, then you step back and you reform and you let it go.
So I think quitting is something that almost should never be done. And I'm going to make that statement, and then I'm going to try to back it up with something.
All right.
Okay. So obviously there's a couple caveats to this. One of them is, if you're someone who all day long, what you really want to do is run the fastest 100-yard dash in the world, and you don't have the physical ability or the athletic body to do that, then obviously that's not going to be something that you're going to be successful in. So physical attributes aside from your goal, if you erase yourself from that and you look at just things that you believe you can accomplish, and that there's roadblocks to, but they're not going to be physical roadblocks that kind of get you out of the way of that. So when you're looking at that, I think anyone can really achieve anything as long as they are super driven towards learning and trying to figure this or solve this problem, right? How can I get there? So if you're someone who every day you think about that thing, you think about that goal, it's on your mind, you're learning about it, you're reading about it, and you're failing over and over again, I don't think that that's a reason to quit, because it's continuing to drive your passion. If it stops driving your passion, maybe it's okay to let it go.
Okay, so the key is the passion.
A lot of times, what does success look like for us? We're at A and we're trying to get to B.
Yeah.
Okay, so we think, okay, we just need to get to B. But the reason why I say we don't quit is if it's something that is important to us and it drives us, we may not get to B, but we might find C. We might find D, like these other options, right? And so we might not actually achieve what we're trying to achieve, but by continuing to do that thing, right, and not give up, we might find something that is also great, right? So it's not necessarily that you shouldn't give up because one day you're going to accomplish your dream. That's not necessarily what I'm saying, because that sounds romantic in some sense. It's that if we allow ourselves to continue on and we're really passionate about it, we might not end up with B, but we might find our C or our D or something else that we can latch onto that is really great.
Yeah. That's an argument for flexibility and kind of in the, used to be a buzzword, iteration, right? Mm-hmm. Of just moving from, because your example was you wanted to be a manager of a Major League Baseball team when you were younger.
Yeah.
And so walk us through how that fits in with what you're saying.
Well, I mean, I think that our lives just go through changes, evolution. So when I was younger, I went into sports management at Florida State, and I really enjoyed that aspect of things. And I wanted to eventually move on up the ladder in Major League Baseball and, be front office. And I came to the realization when I was going for my master's or trying to get into a master's program that the path that I was taking wasn't going to get me to where I wanted to go. And so I had to decide, based on all the previous experience I had had, is this something I'm still passionate about? And the answer was every single step that I took along the way, I realized this isn't actually something that I'm passionate about. The end result I'm passionate about, but the part to get there I'm not interested in as much. The work experience that I'd had just wasn't fulfilling. And so it led me to kind of pivot my role and think, how can I do something that is fulfilling? And one of the things that I found very fulfilling in my life, probably the most fulfilling thus far, is teaching and just being a professor. Having a class, having students, it's been really great. And it's given my life purpose that I didn't know I didn't have.
Well, and I think also like the pivot from that path was, initially you were thinking about using sports as like your sample, right? Like to study teams and see what sports teams, like the things that sports teams do well. And so that was sort of the pivot that kept the passion, kept you sort of thinking about sports, which I do think is still a passion. It's just become more of a hobby. Mm-hmm. But that's what moved you into sort of the next path was academia.
But that's what I want to stress is that when I talk about finding your C, right? When you're shooting for B, but you find your C, it doesn't have to be something that's super similar. It can just be that winding road, right? That takes you where you don't expect. And so that's my experience. And I think that's a lot of people's experience is that they are trying towards something, they fail, they shift, they move, they pivot, and eventually they get somewhere. And it's not necessarily quitting or failure, because I never sat down, and I think a lot of people don't sit down and think, this chapter is over, I'm quitting. You just move, you flow, you ebb, and you just pivot, and things happen. And all of a sudden you look up and you're somewhere that you didn't expect. And I think that's really powerful, because instead of framing it as a negative thing of, I'm not doing well at this, or I'm failing a lot, I'm going to quit. It just becomes, hey, this didn't work out. Let's try this. Let's move on to this. See what happens if I do this.
Yeah. Yep. There's a lot of sharp emotions attached to failure, right? We talked a little bit about fear, the discomfort in stretching and possibly failing. And I'm reminded years ago of the studies of elderly, and it asked them basically, do they have any regrets and this and that? And most people actually, may have had a personal regret or two, but their main regret overall that was consistent in the study was not taking enough risk. That is, people basically look back to their life, which I think is a part of why we're having this conversation today, is there's a lot of reasons why people who've had some success sometimes top out, because the, whatever you want to call it, endowment effect, aversion to losses, once people get enough of something, or not enough isn't the right word, but once people attain some status, some of the goal is about not losing it. Once you attain some money, some of your goal flips to not losing it. And so we can become averse, paradoxically, as we're getting more successful. And that may dampen our willingness to try stuff, to experiment, to do things differently.
Well, I think I see it a lot in organizations. I see it in conversations with people who really actually don't like their jobs. And they might even like the career, the job, but they're not happy with the organization for whatever reason. And yet it never even occurs to them to leave.
Because it's safe.
Because it's safe and certain.
Yeah, we sometimes call that the curse of the middle class, right?
I mean, you got a lot of things riding on your job. It is a big deal to change. But at the same time, how much better would your life be if maybe you were in a spot that, was either the job was more fulfilling, or the people you didn't have the interpersonal problems with, whatever it is that is getting them down. And I think it goes to something that you were talking about like last night when we were originally talking about this, is that we don't get enough of the story. We get a little bit of the failure and then a lot of the story of success. And I think because that happens, like, we worry that failure like can sneak up on us.
Well,
that,
I mean,
that it's like a bomb that goes off in your life.
Oh, yeah.
yeah, and it disrupts you.
Right. And you had no idea it was coming. And it's devastating.
It's devastating.
And really, failure is just like progress. It's usually much more incremental. There's usually signs that if you're paying attention, like most people in organizations, it's hard to get fired by most organizations.
Yeah.
And yet people like will go into organizations, some of them, and people are afraid of the gotcha. Like, I do one thing wrong and they got me, they're going to fire me. I don't know as if we've ever really seen that. There was always, yes, you saw that person get fired and you were surprised, but I guarantee you that person was getting feedback all the way around. Whether it was formal or informal, they were getting feedback that things were not going well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so it's like this, I think that keeps people in an organization because they have this sense that failure can sneak up on them and just explode their life. But really, like, most of the time it's much more incremental. Your success is incremental, your failures are incremental. And at any time you could change the direction or the valence.
Just speaking to what you said about how we don't talk enough about failure, I think that's such a massive issue. And that's the whole reason why I wrote this, is that I was looking at, we did the interviews with people that talked about their relationship with failure. And the things that they said was so much worse than I would have thought. And then, someone said to me, it's important that you talk about failure because it's just not talked about as much. And I didn't really understand what that person meant. And so, because I thought, well, sure, certainly we talk about failure. I mean, everyone deals with it. And then I was looking on YouTube and places like that people commonly get helpful advice, on businesses and how to start them and entrepreneurship. All the keywords, all the titles were top 10 best practices or top 10 things to do to be successful, or top 5 things that you can do to be successful. Everything was framed around success and winning and happiness, right? And we just don't talk about the failures. And one thing I say to my students when we talk about entrepreneurship is there's so much media out there from very wealthy people, very successful people, CEOs, all sorts of people that get invited to speak at places because they have the platform to be able to do that. And unfortunately, when these people speak, it's often the case that the further and further they grow and become successful, the harder it is for them to remember specific stumbling blocks, specific points of failure. And if you watch anyone who is very, very successful, you'll often see that there's this pattern where failure to them when they're speaking to others might look like, oh, I went bankrupt. Oh, I was living out of my car.
The big events.
Yeah, these big events. But how? How did you go bankrupt? What were the steps that you took to be successful? How did you fail? Why did you fail? And what did you learn from that? These are the things that over time we kind of get rid of in our brain, and we build up this myth of who we become, our success, and we get rid of the failure parts. But I think the failure is so instrumental. And so I always caution students, when you watch or listen to really famous people talk about how they became successful, know that there's a bias towards their mythology, and all of us have a mythology that we build up in our head about why we're successful. We tend to get rid of the failure parts. We tend to kind of depress the difficult parts to talk about. And so I said, take this with a grain of salt. There's going to be some good advice, obviously, but it's not going to give you the full picture of that person. And so I think as society, we need to be better about talking about failure, specific points of failure, so that people in the future generations can learn from that.
Yeah. 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 We had the experience a lot in our consulting of the really good CEOs taking your advice and telling people when they've stumbled and when they've made mistakes. And even as they're doing things that hey, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have done that. And that's very, it's actually inspiring for people to realize, okay, the boss, she makes mistakes too, or the boss is still failing, or the boss has had these setbacks, so you don't feel alone when it happens to you. I am reminded of you may have been thinking about this, but the caveat to that from some of Adam Grant's research is that you don't want to give too much of the negative when people don't know you already.
Right.
Because this advice that we're giving about admitting failure tends to work when people already know that you're solid and dependable and trustworthy. And
right. They have to actually
know that that's the main.
Right. They have to be like a little bit surprised, I would say, that you had a failure because they perceive you as having it all together. Because, thinking that you're a fool or just not even knowing if you're a fool, then and you overshare your failures, then like you kind of are writing your story. You're right. If you share too early, then the narrative is, well, this person's a joke.
Right. Yeah.
And so you have to you sort of assess, because it's not even just knowing you. You have to assess, well, are you generally held in a positive esteem before you start sharing failures as a leader, because it could otherwise undermine you.
Yeah.
But in terms of helping, if you can pull it off, in terms of helping people in the organization, I mean, it depends on the organization. If you have an organization that is so standardized, if you have McDonald's, I'm not sure you want a lot of failure, because you basically have told them exactly when to do what and everything's timed.
And that might be an example of the paved path, right?
Right. But if you want an organization where, especially with knowledge workers, where people are thinking differently and trying things that may give you a competitive advantage to your competitors, then a leader who will share their failures gives basically permission to the people underneath them. Hey, it's not the worst thing in the world. We can get over it.
Yeah, I think any organization that relies on individuals to build up the collective knowledge of everyone in the organization and find new things and create new products or really determine new paths for the company to take can really learn from failure and how it should be used constructively. And I'll give you an example. 3M, massive company, have tons of products, tons of different things that they do in completely different industries. But one of the things that they do that I think is super valuable is they keep a detailed record of everything that people work on. And not the company doing that. They're telling employees, hey, I need you to write down everything, all the steps you're taking, one through however long it takes to get to where you go. And sometimes at the end of the road, it's failure and they pivot, right? They pivot to something else. They're C. Sometimes they're successful, but they have all this data on all the steps, all the iterations. And what winds up happening is 3M will go back into that binder. They'll go back into the steps that were taken. What was successful, what was not. And they're actually able to branch out from those things and sometimes create wildly different products just based off of having a detailed log of how they failed and how they succeeded.
I feel like, and I know we talked about it when I was going through the PhD program, and I think you and I have talked about it. I feel like that's one of the things that science doesn't do well. We only publish the articles that have findings
Oh gosh, we could have a whole other podcast on this.
But I mean, like, honestly, like,
Right.
you know,
We would unfortunately have no listeners.
Yeah.
I know, but I mean, like, it is important, right? Like, because if you could go and do like the Google failure search instead of the Google Scholar search, you know, you pull up the methodologies that people tried to do things, and it may not be that the relationship isn't there, but that the way that they tried it, because that was what was open to them, caused the failure. But knowing that means that you don't repeat the failure, because I think there's just a lot of effort that's going out repeating potential failures, that if we actually had access to the failures, we might learn and then change around how we study something and maybe make progress on it.
Yeah, and just to kind of build off of that, you know, 3M, they write everything down. We, you know, good people that are constructive with their failure, they'll learn from their failure, and they'll you know, incrementally change, although they'll learn or they'll build up on that and eventually become successful. But one of the things that we don't often do is keep a log of the ways that we messed up, the failures that we had, not as a negative thing to look back on as like a monument to all of our failure, but just in case you want to replicate part of that journey. You already know the stumbling blocks that you already had to go through.
And it's remarkable how much you forget.
It is so remarkable how much you forget. And I find that if you don't look back, you wind up hitting the same failure points. And you know what you say when that happens is, I remember this happening last time. And maybe the recovery is easier. But what if we just got rid of that entirely and we just went around it instead? So I think that there's something to be said for looking at failure and approaching it like an engineer, and seeing failure as something that you can learn from. You write it down, you write what you did, you write what you learned, so that you can then look back and figure out how you can avoid that in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, it occurs to me, for years we've talked about the one thing that, like, a lot of the really successful people we know do some type of journaling. And it occurs to me that that's Spencer's talking about it a little more fine-grained, but basically it's journaling. Yeah. And it's talking about what happened and what I learned today, which is back to the discomfort that I think underlies a lot of, I think for me, the tragedy of failure is that most people are not accumulating enough failures because they're not actually pushing through discomfort enough. And that, I'll say, that's the same in my own life. I mean, I've had okay Spanish for years, and I have to push myself when I'm in an Uber with somebody who I know speaks Spanish to try to speak Spanish to them instead of English. And it always feels easier to speak English than Spanish, but that's not helping me learn my Spanish.
It's also uncomfortable if you make a mistake, you know? For
Sure.
a lot of people, it's like, I don't want to make a mistake and embarrass myself.
Well, that's the stigma attached to
that's
failure.
the discomfort.
I think talking about how we perceive ourselves, there was a study by Columbia University that looked at middle schoolers in New York, in some underprivileged areas and middle class areas. And they were asked why certain people became successful and what traits made them successful. And they looked at, Einstein and Edison and all these people. And the overwhelming response was that these people that they were studying in history books, they had innate knowledge, intelligence, skills.
Yeah, the right stuff.
They had the right stuff, and I don't. These kids believed these people were successful because they had this special formula that I don't have. And that's such a damaging perception.
Yeah, that's growth mindset. Well, that's fixed mindset, but the opposite is growth mindset. And so it's whether or not you take a failure and are like, well, that's as good as I'm going to be, so I guess that's done, versus, okay, I can learn and I can continue to become better. I
think even beyond that, though, is that a lot of these kids, I mean, they're just kids. They haven't even failed in those specific ways of these famous people, these successful people in history books. But they just innately looked at these people as being more intelligent than them, higher intelligence or IQ than they could ever achieve. And I think that's just so damaging, because behind every successful person is a normal person that is just either really, really focused on specific topics and really, really knowledgeable about those things because they were so driven. And again, it's failure after failure until they became successful. Or it's just a normal person who was able to accomplish these things because they had this drive and determination that other people just didn't have. And they just kept going. And I think framing successful people as being massively intelligent, and that's the reason that they're successful, instead of being people who are intelligent enough to know to keep going and to learn intelligently, I think is a really big issue. People's perception of successful people is really negative in the sense that they think these people are on this high pedestal and I'm on this low pedestal. But in reality, what separates them from them is just a healthy relationship with failure and passion, right? Passion to do what they want to do.
Yeah, the drive. Talk a little bit about your thoughts on absolute failure.
So one thing that I talk about is success and failure. They're not polar opposites. We need failures to achieve success. It's an innate part of being successful. But obviously there's some caveats to this, because failure can be absolute. And so one of the things I say, there are two things that are absolute failure. It's like the famous quote, doing the same thing over and over again is the definition of insanity. Failing in the exact same way and learning nothing from it is insanity. It's failure, right? If you're just continuing to press the button and nothing happens, and you're doing it hundreds of times, you're not learning anything because you're continuing to do that thing and nothing's happening. That's failure. That's absolute failure, because you're not learning anything. And then the second thing is failure. Absolute failure exists when you stop doing something that you want to do. So I want to do this thing, but I'm not good at it, so I'm going to fail. I'm going to quit. So when you give up on something that you are really passionate about and you would love to continue doing, but you just don't think you can, or when you keep doing the same thing over and over again without learning, those are the two ways that you can absolutely fail. You're letting yourself down in both of them.
And so what are we telling managers then?
I think they have to, from my perspective, managers have to think about the signal that they're sending. Now, I mean, again, like it does depend on the organization that you're in, but to the degree that you are relying on people to be thinking human beings, then you need to actually make sure that you're not undermining people's ability to take risks and possibly have failures. And some of that might be sharing your own failures, but some of that is also like, your reaction to these things when the failures happen. And then for them as individuals, I would say, like, you want this to be more of a process and incremental, not just for yourself, but also for the people above you, because there are real life ramifications to failure that sometimes are negative, but usually they can be, I think, mitigated when, as you go through trying to achieve something and you're getting negative feedback or you're getting obstacles, that you're informing the people above you who are judging you. So that way, like, there's an early assessment. Okay, well, they're on this path, and yeah, we still think it's valuable. Stay on it. We're still willing to pay this money. Instead of blindsiding your boss, where you've spent a year working on this thing and it's, it produced nothing. It did nothing. And they're just finding out now. Like, to me, if I'm the boss and I'm finding out that an employee is trying something hard and different and unique, and along the way they're struggling, and sometimes I'm trying to, contribute my own thoughts and resources into helping them, and sometimes I'm getting them other thoughts and resources, that feels a lot different, even if it comes out to be nothing, because I've been informed along the way, than I give you resources, I send you on your way, you don't communicate to me at all that you're having problems, and then a year after wasting resources, you come to me and are like, this is a failure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say communication, making sure that people understand what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish, so that they're not completely blindsided by this deviant path that you've taken that has led to nowhere in case it does.
Talk a little bit about your idea of a sparring partner.
So one thing I discuss is a boxer, right? When a boxer is training, they're punching a punching bag. They're working out. All these things are great. They get you in shape. But at the end of the day, working out really hard or punching a punching bag is not going to get you in the best shape that you need to in order to fight in the ring. And so in order to do that, you have to have a sparring partner, someone who you can get in the ring with, practice, train, develop with, who will focus on your weaknesses and expose you for them so that you can begin to shield yourself from those things. Someone that will build you up by healthy criticism. And so one of the things I talk about is that Tversky and Kahneman and their relationship at Hebrew University, where they worked so closely together, and they were each other's best allies, but also probably their greatest critics of each other's work. They really worked hard together in a very confined space to get the best work out of each other. And having that kind of person in your life, if you can find it, is such an asset. Finding someone who will criticize you in a constructive way and help show you where you can improve. So the idea of finding a sparring partner is finding someone who will show you points of failure that could occur, and show you where you're weak so that you can begin to focus on those things, learn through those things, and move past them into success.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the expertise studies by Anders Ericsson many years ago said basically you have to do the thing and then you need to get feedback as quickly and as frequently as possible on how you're actually doing. And a lot of times that's a coach or a mentor or a sparring partner, like to use the word that Spencer's using. Makes sense.
It does. I think embedded in that, though, is that you have to be comfortable with failure because, I mean, in some regards, getting negative feedback, I think the reason why so many people are resistant to it is because there's a piece of that that's telling you you're wrong.
Can't do it, yeah.
Or that what you're doing is wrong. And so, like, there's a piece of that can feel like failure. And so, like, I think it's like kind of step one. And I mean, going through a Ph.D. program, it teaches you this.
Oh yeah, 100%.
You know, that like you get used to having negative feedback and it actually not mattering. Like I remember
not negatively impacting.
Not negatively. It matters because two things happen. The first is that you realize that everybody's getting it and there's no stigma to it. And so you write down what they say to you and then you go back and you try to do better. And that's the second thing that happens is it actually does, in fact, make you better.
Yeah.
And so once you get, like, it's a very weird process that is unique, I think, to academia, where you learn basically how to really take negative feedback that I don't think it necessarily is. I think people stumble into it in like regular life. And I think it's necessary to get there before you can really find a sparring partner. You have to be comfortable, like you have to be able to trust the other person.
To actually be willing to take feedback.
Yeah, you have to be willing to take feedback, but you also have to trust that the other person is actually going to give you negative feedback. Because like a lot of the time, like because people have such a negative reaction to negative feedback, like a lot of people pull their punches and try not to give it to them. Like you'll go up to them and be like, hey, what do you think about this idea? Great idea. And like, they don't think it's a great idea.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, this is something that you have to be somewhat comfortable with failure in order to develop into this.
Anything else that managers should know? I mean, I think as someone who, like you, spends a lot of time talking to other people in coaching, in business, I think the reason this is an important topic is we take the discomfort too seriously as a signal we should stop, and not as a signal we might be on the right path to learning something new.
Yeah, I think to the extent that, emotions are funny, we feel a bunch of them all at the same time, and we're really bad about taking a moment to think about them and what they really mean. And so I think, part of the rewiring may actually simply being like, okay, I know I'm feeling discomfort. And so what does that actually feel like? And, why?
Right.
And
trying to make sense of it.
Yeah. And if you get to the why, like if you're feeling discomfort because there's something hard but interesting, like to me, that might actually uncover like excitement.
Okay.
I would just say that I think there's such a negative view of failure in general. And maybe we as a society, and maybe, further trickling down, managers, businesses, need to be more okay with failing in smaller incremental ways. I mean, obviously failure in a big way can be really massively damaging, but just getting rid of the stigmatizing of failure being a negative thing, and just looking at it like, you know what, this will teach us something new. And so maybe it starts with CEOs in general, and maybe it goes down the line to managers, but just recontextualizing and telling people in the workplace, it's okay to fail. It's okay. Just communicate what you're trying to do.
Don't fail stupidly, but
Yeah, don't fail stupidly. Let's learn from it. Let's write down what we're doing, and let's see if we can learn something from it. Because even if we can't get to where we want to go, maybe we can find something great that we never thought we could find. We could find our C. We can find that thing that we weren't looking for. And that thing that we weren't looking for can be very valuable. I mean, the example, the 3M example, the Post-it note, maybe 3M's greatest thing that they ever put together, financially speaking, was completely found because of an accident. There was a scientist that was working on a really sticky substance, and they couldn't get it to work. They put down their research. They had logged everything. Then someone else from 3M had this idea. Hey, maybe I could have a note or some sort of sticky substance where I could write a note on something and it would stick, but it wasn't going to rip off the page. I could take it off easily. So it's not super sticky, which is the exact opposite of what the first guy wanted to do. The first guy wanted to create something very sticky. And so this guy's saying, maybe it doesn't have to be that sticky. And so they looked into what that person had done and said, hey, this could work. This could be exactly what we need. And then that person's failed research effort became reinvigorated again into an entirely new product for an entirely different industry. And we're given something great. And so failure isn't the end all be all. It can just lead to something that we don't expect. And in the case of 3M, a massive game-changing product that has come to define the company. The company does so many things, but people know them as the Post-it Company. So you just never know what failure can lead to.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's Spencer Fraseur. His book is called Failing Upward. We'll put a link to where you can get a hold of it. And good luck with your dissertation.
Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate it.
thank you everyone for joining us today on Management Muse. We are a podcast / YouTube channel that we hope is entertaining and educational. If you are on YouTube, we would appreciate you subscribing and maybe leaving a comment and a like. If you are on any of the podcasts listening to this, we would appreciate stars, following, comments, all the good stuff. We want to say thank you to Sarah and Rebecca. And then just as a last minute reminder, we also want to mention that we are management and communication professionals working in the field, but also have degrees that back us in science. All that being said, we are talking in generalities on this podcast. We do not actually know your particular situation. So proceed with common sense and maybe a little bit of experimentation on your end. And we hope that you make the world a more beautiful place by making work a more enjoyable place. See you next time on Management Muse.